But now Dave Chappelle has always been funnier than me. And Chris Rock has always been funnier than me. I've always been aware of who was funnier than me. I've just also been aware of who wasn't.
While Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle just kept watching everything from a distance. Well, until now, just recently, both of these comedy legends have finally started speaking up, revealing why Katt could never be controlled and why the entertainment industry could never manage to break his spirit. So what did they finally admit? And why are they deciding to speak out right now after so many years of saying nothing? Join us as we uncover the truth of Katt Williams' defiance and why he is unstoppable, all because of the one interview that changed everything. On January 3rd of 2024, Katt Williams sat across from Shannon Sharpe on the now infamous Club Shay Shay podcast and basically set off a bomb that the comedy world is still recovering from. For almost 3 entire hours, Katt Williams systematically and brutally dismantled the carefully crafted public images of some of comedy's biggest and most beloved names. He called out lies, he exposed shocking theft, and challenged narratives that people had just accepted as truth for decades. He absolutely did not hold back calling into question Kevin Hart's meteoric rise, suggesting it wasn't what it seemed. He directly accused multiple comedians of stealing his material. He also talked about industry gatekeepers who ultimately decide which black comedians get amazing opportunities and which ones get professionally buried. He spoke about the nature of compromise, what you are forced to give up to land certain roles, and about that hidden price of fame that no one ever dares to talk about out loud. The interview went viral, instantly racking up millions of views in just a matter of days. Social media platforms exploded with reactions and memes, and intense debates raged about if Katt was telling the truth or was just bitter about his own career struggles. So many people simply wrote him off as a troublemaker. Others saw him as a person finally saying what everyone else knew, but was just too afraid to actually articulate. But the most fascinating reactions were from the people Katt didn't mention at all: comedy legends Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle. Both comedy legends, who had maintained very careful public images, had their own complicated dealings with the entertainment industry. They had both walked away from massive opportunities before, when the specific terms just didn't feel right. They didn't jump on social media to defend any of the people Katt had criticized, and they didn't even release statements to the press trying to distance themselves from his claims. Initially, they just stayed quiet, content to just watch the fallout. And when they eventually did speak about Katt Williams in various interviews and comedy specials, in the months that followed, what they revealed was absolutely stunning in its raw honesty. Because Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle didn't defend the entertainment industry at all. Instead, they defended Katt Williams. And by doing so, they uncovered some truths about how the comedy business truly operates that most people just never get to hear. So first, let's dive into what exactly Chris Rock revealed. Here's what Chris Rock finally admitted. For over 3 decades, Chris Rock has been successfully navigating the complicated entertainment industry. He's hosted the Oscars, starred in major movies, sold out arenas globally, and built a net worth estimated at over $60 million. He is by any standard one of the most successful comedians currently alive. But in several interviews following Katt's bombshell appearance on Club Shay Shay, Chris started speaking on Katt Williams in a manner he never had previously. He acknowledged a simple truth that most successful entertainers absolutely refuse to admit: the industry is built to reward compliance and to punish authenticity. Chris explained how there's an incredibly specific path that black comedians are pretty much expected to follow if they ever hope to achieve mainstream success. You start in the comedy clubs, you work until you get noticed, then you get your development deal. You do the sitcom or a supporting role in a buddy comedy, and crucially, you don't make any of the white executives feel uncomfortable. And you don't talk too much about race, except in ways that are specifically designed to make white audiences feel good about laughing. And most importantly, you definitely don't criticize the people who write the big checks. Katt Williams broke every single one of those unspoken rules, and he did it repeatedly over his entire career, often talking about race in ways that made some people extremely uncomfortable. He publicly criticized powerful executives by name. He often walked away from projects when he felt he was disrespected. He refused to take any roles that required him to wear a dress, a decision that sparked a huge separate controversy over whether Hollywood deliberately emasculates black male comedians as a condition for achieving major stardom. Chris Rock flat out admitted that Katt's refusal to ever play the Hollywood game cost him major opportunities that would have made him significantly more wealthy and even more famous than he already is. But he also admitted something that was more important, that Katt held on to his integrity in a way that most successful comedians, including Rock himself, simply had not. This was a truly stunning admission coming from someone on Chris Rock's level of fame. He was basically confessing that his own success was built on compromises that Katt was just never willing to make. This wasn't because Katt was more talented or funnier, although Chris openly praised his comedic abilities. It was because Katt Williams valued something much more than he ever valued fame and a big paycheck. Chris also went on to address the specific accusations Katt had made about fellow comedians stealing his material. He didn't drop any names, but he did acknowledge that joke theft is a much bigger problem in the industry than the public realizes. And the comedians who tend to get away with it are usually the ones who are already so successful that no one dares to challenge them. The implication was absolutely clear. Katt Williams was spilling uncomfortable truths about an industry that runs on carefully crafted lies. And the reason he was so unstoppable wasn't because he was some kind of untouchable figure. It was because he had absolutely nothing left to lose. He had already given up on mainstream acceptance years ago, which meant the industry's usual tools of control, like threatening someone's career, their money, and their access to big stages, just didn't work on him anymore. Chris Rock's most revealing statement came during a conversation about why some comedians really make it while others completely fail. He explained that talent is important, but what's more important is whether or not you're willing to play the game. And Katt Williams, as Chris put it, had never once been willing to play ball with anybody. That decision made him both unemployable by industry standards and yet completely free in ways that more successful comedians could never hope to be. Now, let's switch gears to Dave Chappelle's point of view and what he has to say about the whole Katt Williams situation. Dave Chappelle has a unique perspective on walking away from it all. If Chris Rock's comments about Katt were surprising, then Dave Chappelle's were on another level because Dave is the one comedian alive who actually did what most people only dream about. He walked away from $50 million and the most popular show on television because the price of continued success just felt wrong. Back in 2005, Dave Chappelle famously abandoned Chappelle's show and an enormous contract he had with Comedy Central. The decision sent shockwaves through the entertainment business and confused fans who couldn't figure out why someone would give up so much money and fame at their absolute peak. For years after that, Dave was notoriously quiet about the exact reasons why he left the show. He gave a few explanations like not liking the show's new direction or feeling the laughter for his racial humor was coming from a bad place, and of course the pressure and stress. But he never really spelled out the deeper reasons for his departure until much, much later. When Dave finally started to open up about Katt Williams in recent years, he approached the topic with the insight of someone who had also refused to compromise when the industry demanded it. He recognized in Katt's career path a stark reflection of his own personal journey, except Katt never had that massive mainstream success before he walked away. He explained how the entire entertainment industry is a machine that operates on pure control. The networks, the major studios and production companies want to control the material and they want to control the message. They want to control the comedian's public image, and in the end, they want to control the actual comedian themselves. The main way they keep that control is by dangling money access and the promise of more opportunities in front of you. Katt Williams, in Dave's opinion, realized very early in his career that the price for mainstream success was simply too steep. The movie and television roles being offered would have required him to compromise his own dignity. He ultimately decided that keeping his integrity and his independence was far more valuable than anything Hollywood could possibly offer him. He walked away from huge opportunities that other comedians would have practically sold their souls for. Instead, He built his career entirely on his own terms through relentless stand-up touring and making a direct connection with audiences who loved what he was really saying. Dave admitted that while this particular path is financially devastating, you get to keep something that most successful entertainers lose along the way. That is the powerful ability to say whatever you want without worrying about who you might offend or if your next big contract will be renewed. You get to own your own voice. And in an industry that is literally built on controlling people's voices, that kind of personal ownership is the rarest and most valuable thing you can have. Dave's comments on Katt's situation revealed another important truth about the business. That the very comedians who criticized Katt for being difficult are often the same ones who have completely given up their own independence in exchange for success. They don't resent Katt because he is wrong, but because his steadfast refusal to compromise highlights their own painful compromises. But if their criticism says more about them than about Katt, what does that really reveal about the whole system they're all stuck inside? A disturbing pattern that nobody wanted to acknowledge. Once legends like Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle started talking openly about Katt Williams and the industry problems he was exposing, yesterdayly other patterns became visible things that had been hiding in plain sight for many years. The very first pattern is the massive double standard for how the industry treats black versus white comedians. You see white comedians who cause trouble, who call out executives, who turn down huge deals, and they're often praised as mavericks or geniuses who are protecting their artistic vision. But when black comedians do the exact same things, they're labeled as difficult, unprofessional, and basically unemployable. Dave Chappelle walking away from $50 million was immediately framed by the media as a breakdown or mental health emergency. It took several years before the entire narrative shifted to recognize it was a deeply principled decision. Meanwhile, you have white comedians who walk away from projects for creative reasons, and they are instantly celebrated for their integrity. Katt Williams has been arrested on multiple occasions, gotten into public altercations, and had his personal struggles turned into a complete media spectacle. The media coverage consistently framed these moments as clear evidence that Katt was simply out of control or self-destructive. What those news stories rarely if ever bothered to mention was the context. The fact that many of these incidents happened during times when Katt was actively exposing industry corruption, or right after he refused roles that would have forced him to compromise. This pattern strongly suggests that whenever a black comedian refuses to play by the industry's rules, the system works overtime to discredit them personally, so their professional criticisms are dismissed as the angry rantings of someone unstable or deeply bitter. Then there's the second pattern, joke theft, and how it gets handled when the thief is a much bigger star than the original comedian. For many years now, Katt Williams has been calling out specific examples of his comedy material being stolen. He calls out names and gives the specifics which jokes got stolen and exactly when it happened. The response from the comedy industry and from his fellow performers has mostly been complete silence or total dismissal. The comedians he accused either pretend the claims don't exist or just issue vague denials without ever getting into specifics. The industry never investigates because the people being accused are almost always the ones generating the most profit. Chris Rock actually acknowledged this specific pattern himself. He explained how incredibly difficult it is to prove joke theft, and how the industry always protects successful comedians, even when the theft is obvious. And he said the comedians who get their jokes stolen are usually the ones without enough power to do a single thing about it. Now, Chris didn't call out any specific names, but the implication he was making was crystal clear. Katt Williams was right all along about the theft, and the reason no one did anything about it was because the people who profit from keeping the current system in place have absolutely zero interest in changing it. And the third pattern is the issue of the dress. Katt Williams has talked repeatedly about being offered movie roles that required him to wear a dress, and he has made it clear he turned down millions rather than accept them. He has also suggested that it's a deliberate tactic in Hollywood to emasculate black male comedians as a requirement for achieving mainstream success. This claim is pretty controversial, mainly because it sounds just like a conspiracy theory. But when you actually go look at the filmographies of the top black male comedians over the last 3 decades, a disturbing pattern emerges. You have Martin Lawrence, Eddie Murphy. Tyler Perry, Kevin Hart, Chris Tucker, and Jamie Foxx, just to name a few, have all famously worn dresses in huge blockbuster films. Dave Chappelle himself was heavily pressured to wear a dress for a movie, and he flat out refused, which became a huge part of his decision to walk away from mainstream Hollywood for a time. He has spoken about this publicly, confirming the pressure is very real and that it's aimed specifically at black male performers in ways that white performers simply don't experience. Katt's staunch refusal to participate in this pattern cost him major roles that would have seriously elevated his film career. But what it did allow him was to maintain a specific image and dignity he prized more than the millions of dollars those movie roles would have generated. So Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle, by acknowledging these patterns in public, were essentially confirming Katt Williams wasn't paranoid or just making all of this up. Katt was laying out exactly how the entertainment industry really operates, and the reason nobody could shut him down is because he'd already left the very system designed to keep him quiet. And all of this leads to the one question nobody really wanted to ask out loud. What if the story of one of comedy's biggest stars isn't the one we were sold? The explosive Kevin Hart situation that nobody seemed to want to address. One of the most viral and explosive moments from Katt Williams' Club Shay Shay interview was his lengthy and detailed takedown of Kevin Hart. Katt basically questioned if Kevin's rise to become one of the world's highest paid comics was actually real, suggesting that major opportunities were just handed to him in a way they weren't for other comedians. He also implied that Kevin's success involved making some huge compromises that Katt just wasn't willing to make. Kevin Hart did respond, but very carefully, and he avoided addressing any of the specific accusations. He simply chalked up his success to nothing but hard work, and insisted he would never let anyone try to diminish what he'd managed to build. It was an incredibly controlled, very safe response that ultimately didn't address a single thing Katt Williams had brought up. But what was way more fascinating was what comedy legends Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle had to say about the Kevin Hart scandal when they were asked about it later. They didn't jump to defend Kevin Hart, but they also didn't attack Katt Williams. Instead, they started talking about how the industry itself manufactures success for a select few while making it nearly impossible for everyone else to break through. Chris pointed out that there are literally hundreds of incredibly talented black comedians who work just as hard day in and day out as Kevin Hart, who are just as gut-bustingly funny and who have that same intense drive and discipline. But only a very, very small number of them actually achieve the level of massive success that Hart has. The difference isn't just about talent or work ethic alone. The real difference comes down to access and opportunity, which are controlled by industry gatekeepers who decide who gets promoted and who is completely ignored. Dave then took it even further, explaining that the industry actively searches for comedians who are considered safe choices, meaning comedians who won't say the kind of things that make corporate sponsors really uncomfortable. They want people who won't criticize the industry itself and who can be trusted to deliver content that generates revenue without creating any controversy that costs them money. Kevin Hart, according to their analysis, was the perfect candidate for the profile of what the industry wanted. Talented, extremely hardworking, and completely non-threatening to mainstream white audiences, and crucially willing to work within the system rather than ever challenging it. This doesn't make Kevin Hart undeserving of his success, of course, but it does suggest that his path was made significantly smoother in ways that the paths for other comedians who don't fit that mold simply are not. Katt Williams just doesn't fit that particular profile. And so the industry never really opened doors for him, the way those same doors just flew open for Kevin Hart. Both Rock and Chappelle acknowledged this exact dynamic without ever directly criticizing Kevin. They were essentially confirming that Katt was right about how the system really works, and that Kevin's incredible success story, while truly impressive, was at least partly thanks to the results of industry machinery, not just because of purely organic audience demand. And that's where the entire narrative shifts, because understanding the system reveals something that is actually much bigger. It explains why Katt Williams just can't be stopped right now. Why at this moment, Katt Williams is unstoppable. The fundamental reason Katt Williams cannot be stopped at this particular point in his career is when you think about it very simple. He has nothing left to lose that he truly values more than his complete independence. He left that world of desperation behind him years ago. He built a massive career completely outside the traditional system just by touring constantly, selling out theaters and directly connecting with the audiences who appreciate his very particular brand of telling the truth. He doesn't need to chase a development deal with a major network, and he has no need for a part in some huge Hollywood franchise. He doesn't need a big endorsement deal that comes from a corporate sponsor. He makes a very comfortable living doing stand-up comedy exactly how he wants, which means there's nobody left who has any kind of leverage over him. Katt doesn't have those typical vulnerabilities because he doesn't maintain those kinds of relationships. He already torched every bridge to mainstream success many years ago, and that means there is literally nothing left to threaten him with. The creative freedom that comes from that position is absolutely unmatched. Dave Chappelle experienced this kind of freedom after his famous walkout from Comedy Central. Once he stopped needing the industry's approval, he was finally free to say exactly whatever he wanted. His specials since that time have been incredibly controversial precisely because he is no longer worried about offending the kinds of people who could damage his career. Remember, he already walked away from the biggest payday of his career, which proved to everyone that money and fame are clearly not what ultimately drives him. Katt Williams reached that very same point, but he got there through a much different path. He never reached that incredible mainstream success Chappelle achieved only to famously walk away from it all. Instead, he rejected that entire path right from the very beginning, which meant he never got hooked on it. Both Chappelle and Chris Rock openly admit that Katt's approach is incredibly rare, demanding a special kind of guts that most comedians simply don't possess. Look, it's so much easier to just take the paycheck, make the necessary compromises, and rationalize it all by saying, you'll use that new platform for good work later on. The problem is later rarely shows up because by the time you are successful enough to have genuine leverage, you've become so deeply invested in keeping that success that you can't possibly risk losing it all by actually using your power. But Katt Williams skillfully avoided that entire trap by refusing to build his career on the industry's terms from the very beginning. From day one, he built his entire career completely on his own terms, which meant he never had to sweat losing something he never actually wanted anyway. Now, one specific part of Katt Williams' career that both Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle directly confronted was the string of arrests and the relentless negative media coverage that has followed Katt for many years. Between 2006 and 2018, Katt was arrested a shocking number of times for various charges, including assault weapons possession and even burglary. And the mainstream media coverage of these arrests always framed Katt as an unstable, out-of-control personality who was ultimately self-destructive. The accepted story was that he was a talented comedian who couldn't handle his own success and was wrecking his career through his completely erratic behavior. However, both Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle hinted that this entire narrative was incomplete at best and possibly deliberately misleading at worst. They specifically pointed out how many of Katt's legal troubles seemed to pop up right when he was actively speaking out against the entertainment industry, or right after he had refused major opportunities that would have forced him to compromise his principles. Dave Chappelle specifically spoke about how the industry uses the media as a powerful weapon against anyone who simply won't fall in line. He brought up examples from his own career, talking about times when he himself was going through difficult personal periods, and the media coverage just amplified the pain by creating stories that weren't remotely accurate. He then suggested that Katt Williams experienced this on a much more intense level because Katt was openly attacking powerful people while also battling his own personal struggles. Chris Rock brought up the fact that plenty of white comedians have had substance abuse problems, legal problems, and very public meltdowns without ever facing the same kind of sustained negative press that was aimed at Katt. And this difference in treatment suggests that the media coverage was specifically designed to discredit Katt, not just to report on supposedly newsworthy events. And both comedians made sure to note that through all the arrests and terrible publicity, Katt Williams never stopped selling out shows. His dedicated audience never abandoned him, even when the mainstream media narrative insisted his entire career was over. This incredible loyalty from his fans suggests that the people who actually followed his comedy understood something important that the media was totally missing. They knew that Katt's legal troubles and his constant industry criticisms were deeply connected, and that the system was actively trying to silence a man who was exposing ugly, uncomfortable truths. Of course, this doesn't excuse any illegal behavior if Katt actually did commit the crimes he was arrested for. However, it does add some crucial context that mainstream media reports conveniently left out. That there was a clear pattern of targeting and amplification, which really seemed designed to destroy his overall credibility. All because he was using his significant platform to seriously challenge the industry itself. Because if there truly was an entire system actively working against him, then something incredibly important changed in 2024. And it cracked the door open for others to finally speak up. So what actually changed the underlying dynamics? Something definitely shifted in 2024 that finally allowed stars like Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle to speak more openly about Katt Williams and the industry dynamics he embodies. And there are a few different factors that really contributed to this shift. Well, the most obvious one is that both Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle had finally reached a point in their careers where they just had far less to lose, from being completely honest. Rock's career was already well established and so diversified that he really didn't need to sweat the industry gatekeepers trying to shut him down. Meanwhile, Chappelle had already proven he could walk away from absolutely massive opportunities and still rebuild entirely on his own terms. Another huge factor was the runaway success of Katt's Club Shay Shay interview, which proved there was a massive public hunger for honest conversations about how the entertainment industry truly operates behind the scenes. We all thought we knew her, the golden girl of the silver screen, but we were so wrong. The interview pulled in hundreds of millions of views and absolutely dominated social media for weeks straight. That massive wave of public interest gave other comedians the cover to talk about the issues Katt raised without it looking like they were just starting drama. Also, both Rock and Chappelle had just gone through their own public controversies, which gave them sympathy for what Katt was experiencing. Rock was assaulted on stage by Will Smith at the Oscars. That was a shocking moment, broadcast globally, and easily the most talked about entertainment scandal of 2022. Dave Chappelle had also been attacked on stage, right in the middle of a performance, and was dealing with ongoing controversy over his material about transgender issues. These incidents gave both men direct experience with how the industry and media turn on comedians the moment controversy erupts. They watched how stories get spun and how crucial context is completely ignored, and how their words were twisted to serve agendas completely beyond their control. After all that, they became much more sympathetic to what Katt was saying about being targeted and constantly misrepresented. Fourth, there's been a big generational shift in the comedy world where more established comedians are finally willing to speak honestly about all the industry dysfunction. Younger comics have already been discussing these industry issues far more openly. They're using platforms like podcasts and social media, not the traditional mainstream media channels. The success of those conversations has given the more established comedians permission to finally speak their minds much more freely too. When Chris and Dave began confirming Katt's point of view, it absolutely transformed the whole conversation. Katt could be written off as some bitter comic with an axe to grind, but Chris and Dave couldn't be dismissed so easily. They are at the very top of their game. They have undeniable success, and there's no obvious reason for them to be lying about how this industry actually works. Their willingness to finally confirm Katt's central arguments like that, the industry demands major compromises from black comedians. That success is often completely manufactured, not organic, and that telling the truth always costs you valuable opportunities. And that the media is weaponized against anybody who just won't play along with the program. Gave those arguments a mainstream credibility they simply never had before. Now that you know what Chris Rock and Dave Chappelle finally revealed about Katt Williams, does it change your opinion on his career and the many controversies that have constantly followed him? So was Katt Williams right all along about an industry that very few people ever get to see? And what does it truly mean that two of the biggest legends in stand-up comedy are now validating everything he's been claiming for years. Let us know what you think down in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more updates. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. We promise you'll enjoy it.